Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Thank you all for being here. I just want to say right off the bat to please take a look in the comments or the chat box, and you will see the anti-harassment policy for the festival. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back, and you can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. So we're just going to start off. This is the horror panel, and we are going to do a fun game with all of you. But before we kick into that, I just want to give us all a chance to introduce ourselves. My name is Diana Rodriguez Wallach. My most recent book, Hatchet Girls, came out on Tuesday. So this is release week, everybody. Yes. So Hatchet Girls is based off of the legend of Lizzie Borden. If you all know, she is the infamous accused axe murderess of the late 1800s from Massachusetts. And I imagined what would happen if another mother and father died in a similar way today in Fall River, Massachusetts. Only the person accused is a Puerto Rican boy. And how would that be handled? And I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves because I think you will do it better than I. So, Ann, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Ann Dávila Cardinal, and I'm the author of my most recent book is Breakup from Hell. I write horror and magical realism and speculative fiction for adults, now middle grade and YA. And the most recent book, Breakup from Hell, came out January 3rd from Harper Teen. And it's about a young girl who lives in Stowe, Vermont, Miguela. And she's bored and dying to get out of her town. And a very handsome guy comes to town and is interested in her. And she comes to find out he's not who she thought he was. And also she's not who she thought she was either. So I love writing horror, and I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Crespo. I wrote St. Juniper's Folly, which came out this June. This is a queer YA haunted house book. Like Anne's book, mine is also set in Vermont. It's about a Mexican-American teen named Jamie who's kind of been shuttling around foster care for years, and he returns to his hometown only to end up stuck in a haunted mansion in the woods. And he ends up teaming up with some unlikely allies and making some friends who try to break him out. So that's what mine is about.
Great. And Adrianna?
So hi, I'm Adrianna Cuevas. I'm the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, Cube in My Pocket, Mari and the Curse of El Cocodrilo, and then the book I'm going to focus on today is The Ghost of Rancho Espanto. It's about a boy named Rafa who steals the slushie machine from his school cafeteria, and as punishment, he is sent to a ranch in New Mexico that may or may not be haunted. It's haunted, so...
I love it. So you write middle grade, correct?
I write middle grade. Yes, I write middle grade. YA scares me. Y'all can do that.
Wonderful. So I think we're going to kick off with the game. So this is a bit of a choose your own adventure. So I'm going to go through some questions and scenarios, and our authors are going to talk about whether their characters would do X or Y. They're going to decide which choice their characters would do, and based on the group consensus, we'll pick one option and we will choose our adventure into the next aspect of the game. So it's called Would You Survive? So, all right, let's kick it off and play. Let's see what the first question is. While on your way to school, you come across the Fall River State Forest. That's from my book. One of the most haunted forests in the world. Do you go in? Well, I feel compelled, even though I'm the moderator, to chime in here since I actually did walk through the Fall River State Forest in the dark as research for this book.
It's real.
It is, yes. The Freetown Fall River State Forest is a real place. It is in the same town Lizzie Borden lived in, and it is considered one of the most haunted forests in the world. It's usually listed right underneath that Japanese forest that everyone knows so much about. It's had a lot of haunted activities and is most known. It had the bloodiest war per capita in American history took place there between the Native Americans and the colonists. And there's a high ledge in the forest called the Astronaut Ledge, and there have been a lot of unalivings on that ledge, whether intentional or unintentional, for hundreds of years. So I hiked it as research for the book, and the creepiest thing about it was there was no wildlife. We were there for 5 hours. We hiked for miles and miles. It's thousands and thousands of acres, and we didn't see one squirrel, one bird. We heard no tweets. It was utterly silent except for water, like hearing water in certain parts of it. That was the creepiest thing about it, was to be there in the evening and at night and not even hear a cricket. So now I'll turn that over to all you guys and ask you, based on your characters, do you think your character would go into this forest? Anne, we'll start with you.
Yes. It's so hard to balance the writer, because I'm like, oh hell no. Okay. But probably would, truth be told, and Micah definitely would. She to prove something, or just because she was interested, and she definitely would. Okay. And she'd be leading people.
Yes. Alex, how about you?
I'm going to have to say the same. Although on my end as an author, I would also want to go in. I love nature, and even if it's creepy, I feel like I have to check it out. So I think that my protagonist, Jamie, and we would go in together.
Now, am I correct, Alex? Does your book include a creepy woods as well?
It does, except mine is fictional. So my book is set in this fake town of St. Juniper, Vermont. It's up by the northern border. So it's not real, but it is very spooky. And my protagonist does kind of go into the haunted forest partially because he hears something calling out for him. So there's that element of it too. But I think I would walk in even if there was nothing there. I'd be like, let me check this out.
Now, Adrianna, your characters are a little bit younger. So what do you think they do?
So my main character, Rafa, is huge into playing Dungeons and Dragons. He's a massive D&D fan. I'm going to say he would go ahead and go in because he would just assume it was the reason that he and his friends steal the slushy machine is because they decide to take their game out into the real world. And so Rafa would probably go ahead and enter the forest because he would think it was part of the game. For me as an author, I'm probably going to wander into it, mostly because I have ADHD and I don't pay attention normally where I'm going. So the likelihood of me just ending up here is pretty high.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hearing the history of it, I might be, my family might be Puerto Rican, but I got colonizer blood, and I'm not going to throw myself in front of those people because I wouldn't blame them for taking me out.
Yes.
So I think I'm going to stay on the edges and wave to y'all.
Well, I'll spoiler alert. My characters go into the forest in Hatchet Girls. So I'm going to agree with all of you. And so we are going to choose, yes, I have nothing to fear. Let's see where that takes us. So you enter the forest, drawing the attention of an ancient creature. You sense something is watching you, but you can't see it. Quickly, you decide to leave. You make it to school, but you can't shake the feeling something is following you. When you open your locker, there's a little doll that wasn't there before. So do you A, grab the doll and toss it in the nearest trash can, or B, leave it and walk away? All right, how about we start with Adrianna this time?
Oh, Lord. Okay. My initial reaction, so I love horror, the more gore, the better. But man, dolls, no, that's a no-go for me. I'm not a fan of the dolls, Annabelle, that whole series, that doesn't work for me. But I mean, I don't want to leave this thing in my locker. Neither would Rafa. I think he's going to probably as any good Cuban boy would, he's going to tell his mom what happened. She will likely march to the school and take care of the doll for him, as any good Cuban mother does. So I'm going to say, maybe leave it and walk away. That's what Rafa would do.
Okay. Alex, how about you? What would your character do?
Yeah, I think that Jamie likes facing things head on. So I can imagine that he would immediately grab it and be like, what is this? Like, he would want to get to the bottom of it. Me, on the other hand, I'm the same way. I'm like, I love horror, I love spooky stuff, but dolls is where I draw the line. So personally, I would book it out of there. But I think Jamie would grab it and he would want to find out what it's all about.
Okay. And Anne?
Dolls are a kryptonite for me. Very little scares me anymore after a whole life of following horror, but dolls, clowns, no. Micah is an angry character, at least in the beginning. No, she's just angry. So I think she would toss it in the trash can.
Toss it in the trash. I think my characters would do the same. They would definitely grab the doll. So part of my research for Hatchet Girls was I spent the night in the Lizzie Borden house. One of my characters works. It's a bed and breakfast now in Massachusetts, should any of you want to take a nice weekend getaway. And we slept in the maid's room, which is up in the attic, and they have dolls set up staring at the bed, and supposedly the room is haunted by little ghost children, and so they leave the dolls as toys for the ghosts to play with. Yes, so if you don't mind sleeping with dolls, I highly recommend the experience. But I do believe my characters are all into investigating what's going on, so they would also grab the doll and toss it in the nearest trash can. So we're going to choose that one. So, running to catch the bus, you notice someone watching you. You act natural, but there's something odd about them, something familiar. Your BFF informs you that there's a party tonight. Everyone is going, so hint, hint, you should too. Surprisingly, your parents let you go. You reach the party and realize the party is in the house of the infamous accused axe murderess, Lizzie Borden, which is now a bed and breakfast, as I mentioned, where the crimes also took place. So do you go in? Now, obviously, my characters have already gone in and actually run like one of the ghost tours. So my characters are a definite yes, everyone else is in there. But would your characters say yes, or would they say nope, too much weird for one day? We'll start with Alex.
I think that Jamie would want to go in, and spoiler alert for the first chapter of my book, but he does go into the haunted house. That's how he gets trapped there. So I think that no matter how spooky it was, I think that he'd want to check it out for himself. So I think he would say yes. Okay.
Anne, how about you?
Micah wouldn't want to bother and would want to go home, but she would allow her friends to talk her into going. So she definitely would end up there.
And Adrianna?
Oh, I think Rafa's as much as an introvert as I am. He would not have accepted the invite to the party to begin with. He'd be at home playing video games. But like Anne's character, he does have two friends that will most likely convince him to go. And he will be the victim of peer pressure, if not an axe murder.
Wonderful. All right. So before we go into the next one, I'm going to pose another question to you guys, because this slide touches on a very common trope, which is how teens are depicted in horror. There's almost always the big party scene in every single teen horror, or, the teens partying in the woods, or the scream party. So I was wondering how each of you feel about how teens have historically been treated in horror, and how you see yourself writing those scenes today, and how you want to portray teens today. So we'll start with Anne.
It has changed so much in not just my writing career, but since I watched horror. When I was growing up, there was always the busty cheerleader who would scream and trip. Actually, she's somewhat still in there, but and then there's all these sort of typical tropes, but I think it really has been shaken up a bit, and I think Scream was part of that. And so I think that we've become self-referential sometimes in horror where we're making fun of the genre itself while celebrating it. And so I think I know teens are getting smarter, and I think, or at least more savvy, and I think that the way they're being portrayed is definitely changing.
Mm-hmm. How about Alex? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like with St. Juniper's Folly, I kind of went the opposite route from that classic, you know, you mentioned the classic party scene. It's usually at the midpoint. And St. Juniper's Folly kind of plays with this concept of like, you know, it's like there's a lot of spooky stuff going on, but at the same time, the setting is really like atmospheric, and like part of you understands why it's comforting in a way. Like all three of the main characters in the book are taking like refuge away from their normal lives in the outside world by being in the forest and being with each other. So in a way, I feel like it kind of turns that on its head, where these are like introverted, quieter teens, and the way that they deal with the scary stuff might kind of differ from what you typically see. But then on the flip side, I'm writing a new spooky YA book right now that's going to be my third book, actually, and it's much more classic. It has that party scene. It has a lot more of like screaming and running around and like these dramatic, like tense moments. So I'm definitely happy to like play with either.
Great. Now, Adrianna, your characters are a little bit younger, and that's sort of an emerging market that's getting a lot more popularity now with middle grade horror. So how do you handle horror with a younger audience, and how do you see them being depicted?
Well, as a huge horror fan, like from the writer perspective, I realize that I am apparently super desensitized to gore, because I'll submit something to my editor and she'll say, "Hey, you write for kids," and so I have to scale it back. But what I love about writing middle grade horror, so my characters are typically in 6th grade, is that, you know, at that age, you're really starting to learn how to exert your independence, and putting a child in a horror setting where they're trying to exert their independence is really fun, because oftentimes, like in Rancho Espanto, that means you're going with a friend to explore an abandoned cabin that once was the home of serial killers, because your brain is perhaps not fully developed and you don't quite think through the consequences of your actions. And so it's really fun to have my characters running headlong into just horrible decisions, but they're going to probably make jokes to cope with how terrified they are. And I also like incorporating humor into horror as well. And so I think it's really fun to play around with that with characters that are at that age.
Great. And since I have you all here, I'll do one more follow-up question. Since we're talking about how much the genre has changed, I think one of the big things we've all noticed is that horror has been historically dominated by white male authors, featuring a lot of white characters, and that we are all here now, and we are adding a little diversity in many different aspects to this genre. So how do you feel about, what have you done to incorporate more cultural traditions maybe into your stories, or feature Latinx families in your stories? Or how do you want these Latinx teens to be depicted in your stories now that our stories are being told? So I'll start with Alex.
Yeah, so one thing that I was really excited to put in St. Juniper's Folly was that Taylor, one of the main characters, her dad has this really complicated relationship to magic. And there's kind of like a big backstory there, but the book kind of touches on the fact that he grew up around brujeria, and like it's something that he's familiar with. And the magic system in this book is much more like Eastern European magic and folklore. From the other side of her family. But I'm like really interested in that topic, and like bringing in discussions about how like paranormal stuff is so normal to talk about in a lot of like Latino families and stuff like that. So I love seeing how popular that's become, and seeing more like Latinx authors in the horror space. I think that it makes a lot of sense culturally. So that's really cool to see.
Great. Adrianna?
I think for me, so my debut, The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, the villain is based on a Panamanian mythological creature, because I lived in Panama growing up. And so it's fun to pull perhaps monsters and villains that we haven't seen before in horror, because we are drawing from cultural stories. But I think what I've noticed most about when I'm telling horror is that family is really important. I think kind of like perhaps what Alex was saying, my characters, because they're Latino, like typically it's a multi-generational household. My young characters are not afraid of asking, like, abuela's probably going to come and help out at some point. Like, there's a little bit more collaboration among the family dynamic. It's not so independent and I have to do this on my own, which is, I think, a lot of times what we see in white authored horror, perhaps. So yeah, I would say for me, it's both drawing from cultural mythologies as well as the family dynamic tends to be a little different. I have had an abuela throw a chancla or two at a monster.
Great. Anne?
In Breakup from Hell, I wanted to put a Puerto Rican teenager in Stowe, Vermont, because I moved from New York City to Vermont, and it's, raising a son named Carlos in Morrisville, Vermont is, I remember him hearing Carlos in the store when we went to Puerto Rico and getting all excited because he never heard his name, in the public forum. So I wanted to do that. I also, again, like Adriana was saying, I have the household's run by her abuela, an old school sort of abuela, no chanclas, but it definitely is the kind of abuela that I had that runs the house with sort of an iron fist and a cross, but also is beloved and caring. So I wanted to bring some of those traditions, particularly putting them in Vermont, was meaningful to me.
Great. Okay. How about we head back to the game and see what our characters do next in the survival? So I believe we all chose that, yes, everyone's going into the party. So let's see what happens. There's so many people here. You should be fine, right? Right. Okay. Right. After a few hours, you get a bit tired. You haven't been sleeping well. You decide to sit down for a bit and fall asleep. It's usually not a good idea to party. You wake up the next morning in your room with an axe in your hands, not knowing how it got there. So what do you do? So this happens in Hatchet Girls. It's not too much of a spoiler because chapter 1, you find out that Tessa's brother, Victor Gomez, has been accused of unaliving his girlfriend's parents, and he is found with an axe in his hands, but no memory of why it's there or why he is covered in blood. And so the book is trying to unravel Tessa trying to prove her brother couldn't have possibly done it, while you find out what's really going on in the other timeline. So I know what my characters would do, but I'm going to see what you guys think your characters would do if they woke up with an axe in their hands, not knowing how it got there. So we'll start with Anne. Would your character hide the axe? You're late and you will figure it out later. Or would your character run and go get your parents?
Definitely hide the axe. I mean, I don't know a teenager who would not. Hide the axe. You can figure it out later.
Okay.
Wipe it clean first, though. Wipe it clean first. Wipe your fingerprints off of it.
Yes. Alex?
Yeah, I think all 3 of the main characters in my book would definitely hide the axe. None of them are like inclined to rely on their parents or get help for stuff. So they're all independent. They're all trying to figure things out on their own. So I think that they would go with the first route.
Okay. And Adriana?
Well, since Rafa's on a ranch in New Mexico, his parents are all the way in Miami. So he is probably not going to tell them. He will probably think the axe is useful because in the ranch he's staying at, the bathroom is like full of spiders. So he's probably going to save the axe for later when he has to take a shower and he's afraid of all the spiders in there.
All right. So we are going to choose hide the axe. You're late and you will figure it out later. So on your way to hang with your friends, you spot the person watching you once again. You can't shake the feeling you've met them before. Jokingly, your friend says maybe you were being haunted. Your friends joke your stalker might be a ghost and dare you to throw a small rock to test the theory. Do you throw the rock, possibly enraging the person or ghost? So yes, you need some answers, or no, you can live with the doubt. So we'll start with Adrianna.
So this is actually from my book. While Rafa's on the ranch, there's this mysterious man in a green sweater who keeps following him and basically sabotaging all the work that he's trying to do on the ranch. And so Rafa's friend Jenny was like, hey, let's figure out if this guy's a ghost or not. And she does throw a rock at him. So yes, I'm going to say yes, you need answers.
Okay, Alex?
I'm going to go with no, just because Jamie in my book, he's pretty daring with most things, but when it comes to the ghost in my book, he's very scared of her, and he does his absolute best not to bother her at all. So I think that he would pick no.
Okay, and Anne?
Definitely yes. You know, in the beginning, Micah's sort of a denier, and so she would be like, yeah, I'm going to show you that he's not a ghost. So absolutely.
All right. So we'll go with yes, you need answers. The small rock goes straight through the person, who looks up at you, hand extended, trying to tell you something. It sounds like a warning, but before you can decipher it, the ghost disappears. Suddenly, you realize why they look so familiar. They look like you. You run the scene over and over, but you can't figure out what the stranger was trying to say. Bored, your friend suggests you leave the mall for someplace new. Do you go with or do you go home? So we'll start with Alex. What would you do?
I feel like for the plot, you have to go with them. Like, keep the vibes going. Something adventurous. So yeah, let's say you go with them.
Okay, Anne?
If I'm talking about my main character, she would actually end me. She would go home. And you know, plot wise though, Alex, there could be it could follow her. The darkness could follow them home. So there is possibility in that, but she would definitely go home.
Okay, and Adrianna?
The whole time Rafa's on the ranch, he's trying to get kicked off and get sent home. So yeah, he's going to go home.
Okay, so we'll go with, we had two for go home, right? I just lost track for a second. We're going to go with go home. Let's see what we got. You're on your way home, but your friends text pleading for you to come with. After a bit, you give up and you decide to join. Your friends have no regard for their safety and learn of an abandoned cabin not far from where you are. Do you follow or do you walk home alone? So your options are follows rather than to stay with the group, or you go home alone. We'll start with Adrianna.
So this is from Rancho Espanto too, because Rafa and Jenny learned that there's a cabin on the ranch that was once inhabited by two men who were potentially serial killers. Rafa doesn't want to go, but Jenny is extremely persuasive and persistent and makes him go. So yeah, he's probably going to go along. He needs to learn to stand up for himself more.
Okay. Anne?
In this case, she would definitely go with the group because Micah is a caretaker. You know, she wants to make sure everybody's safe. She doesn't realize why yet, but she would want to stay with them to protect them.
Okay. And Alex?
Yeah, I think my main characters would probably want to stick together. I feel like there's power in numbers, so I think they would stay in the group.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic horror movie trope, right? The minute the person says, I'll be right back, it doesn't go well. So yes, we will follow and stay in the group. Did your friends forget to tell you that the cabin was actually a legendary serial killer's old hideout? Yes. Either way, you're here already, and they're going in. Inside, there are familiar items waiting for you: the axe, the doll, and the ghost. Finally, you understand what it's been trying to say. Turn around, run. Do you A, run, or B, also run? Anne?
Run. Run.
Everyone's going with run, I think. So while we're talking on what you would realistically do, which I think everyone is agreeing that anyone would realistically run, I'm curious if any of you have included real events in your horror books. So have you included any real historical events or real traditions or any real aspects of life? And if so, how do you tread the line between reality and what you are fictionalizing and, work that into your stories? So I'll start with Ann.
Most of it is made up, which is unusual for me. However, it is sort of, I went to a Catholic school in New York City, St. Michael's Academy. And she goes to a Catholic school, and it sort of deals with that. So in one sense, I wouldn't say historical quite yet, Diana. But
yeah, true.
It is. It sort of is based on my experience, but other than that, other than Revelations,
I was going to say you wrote a book that included Hurricane Maria, correct?
Yeah. Well, the first one, 5 Midnights, was about El Cuco or El Cucuy or El Coco, depending on what you refer to him as. And the sequel, Category 5, took place after Maria in Puerto Rico. So, yes, that one. I have, not in this book, but I have definitely, because when I was in copy edits for 5 Midnights, Maria happened. And, for 5 days, I'm in copy edits trying to do them, and I don't know whether my family's alive or not. And so I said to my editor, any Puerto Rican life has become, before Maria and after Maria. And so I really felt it necessary to cover that and to do it in a perspective that I can do, which means I did not live through it, and sort of deal with the challenges for both the people on the island and the Puerto Ricans not on the island. So that you're right. I have done it in the past, just not in Breakup from Hell necessarily.
Alex, have you used any real events or real aspects of life in your books?
Yeah, in St. Juniper's Folly, I think that one of the major themes is about being ostracized, and something I was curious about exploring was how, if Taylor, one of the main characters, is involved in witchcraft, and I was really interested in looking at how beyond the Salem witch trials, how witch trials did happen in the US, far beyond that, way more recent than you'd imagine. And without getting into spoiler territory for the book, it does kind of come into play, and the way that especially historically very white areas are very quick to pinpoint people who are different, and the way that things can kind of spiral out of control. So that's definitely something that I included.
Okay. Adrianna?
Yeah, actually, Rancho Espanto draws heavily from an area. It's based on an actual ranch that I volunteered at, Ghost Ranch, which is in New Mexico, north of Santa Fe. They have a library on the ranch, and I was the volunteer librarian for the summer there out in 2019. And as I was there, I started to learn the history of the land. And one of the things that happened was there were these two brothers that were stealing cattle and hiding them in the canyons around the ranch. And to make sure that nobody came and, discovered all these things that they were stealing, they spread all these ghost stories that the land was haunted. And so that's what I based the ranch on in the book. Yeah. And so it was kind of fun to play around with the stories of where I was setting the book, but then I also made it my own by adding a whole bunch of stuff. So you find balance with what you've based it on.
Yeah, I include a lot of history in my last two horror novels, and at the end of them, I actually include a section that's called The Truth. I was a journalism major in college. I was a reporter for my first work, and I swear, I will always cite my sources. So I include the truth about what really happened with Lizzie Borden and the Native American colonists, war and the history of the forest and stuff, because I don't want to lose sight over the fact that Lizzie Borden was a real person and was actually acquitted for those crimes. So I try to incorporate that in there at the end of my books. I also wanted to ask you guys about something, because I know a couple of you do this really well, which is including humor in horror. That is a big thing. I know, like, that Scream kind of brought it to light, and I know there are a lot of movies and books that really try to use humor to lighten the mood when you're in really tense, horrific moments. And so I was wondering, how many of you, do try to intentionally incorporate humor, and how do you do it? Do you pick like one character, or do you just drop in a scene to like lighten the mood at some point? We'll start with Adrianna, because you write for the younger group, so they probably expect a little more humor, don't they?
Well, no, honestly, like you will find young kids they're fine getting the crap scared out of them, which is awesome. I love it. But for me personally, because I am, I don't know, I'm not a serious person. And I also, my coping strategy is to make jokes when I'm uncomfortable. And so my characters tend to do the same thing, because as an author, it's my responsibility to put them in uncomfortable situations. But I think the way that I accomplish humor in my stories is that there's always that go-to secondary character that is going to be ready with a quip or a comment. In the Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, I have this really drawn out scene where the villain is morphing from this serpent into a Wolverine. And it's really graphic and a little bit gory. And their main character and his two friends are watching this happen. And right as it finishes, my go-to secondary character, Talib, says, "Hey, I just think I wet my pants." Like, there's always going to be one character that I can rely on to kind of lighten the mood. And I think that's good. I think it's good to have balance. You get numb if everything is like scary all the time. And so I kind of like to have it go in waves in my books. And it's just fun to be sarcastic. So
yeah. Anne, how about you?
I mean, Break Up from Hell is a horror rom-com, and
Yeah.
I love horror comedy. I think that, like you said, Diana, I think it diffuses it, especially if you got a high body count, which Diana, those of us, that's the one advantage to YA and adults, you can have a high body count, is that you're going to diffuse it a bit with humor. And I have an absurdist, you probably already know this, but I find humorous things, and I see life as like I'm an alien, and I don't quite, and I'm sort of like, oh, isn't that interesting? And kids, if you feel that way, if you always feel like you're looking at it from another planet, the things in life, don't let anybody change you. But in Break Up from Hell, for instance, there's these shadow demons, which are actually very scary initially, but it, like in this big culminating scene, Bad Bunny's playing, and it's really dark and very theatrical, and all of the demons are going like this in time in the seats, as if she says, like a Disney movie from hell. So I like doing, just sort of not necessarily jokes, but absurdist sort of situations. I find them funny.
Great. Alex, have you included any humor into your books?
Yeah. I think my main character, Jamie, is the one who's bringing the humor. Like, Theo, his love interest and the sort of secondary main character, is so serious. Like, he does not find any of it funny at all. And he doesn't use humor to try to cover up how uncomfortable he is. But Jamie loves making jokes. Of course, he's terrified and he's really nervous, but he just uses his humor to cover that up. And I think that there's such an element of realism there. I think that's true for a lot of people, and especially a lot of teens. So I find it really natural to kind of like have that come out, not in the most stressful moments ever, but when they're talking about a game plan and they're trying to figure things out, it's like so easy for characters to just like crack a joke and try to diffuse the tension. So I definitely love that.
Great. Okay, how about we head back over to the game and see what happens when our characters decided to run. So what will happen next? You run, turning toward the door, but the moment you think you're free, you're back inside the house. The axe is back in your hand, and there's a voice screaming inside your head. You know what to do. It's you or your friends. The axe is heavy in your hand. A voice inside your head tells you there's only one way to escape. What do? You use the axe to attack the house, or you drop the axe. There has to be another way. I'll start with Anne.
Micah would use the axe. again, sort of angry. And you know, I'm not going to blow the spoiler of her heritage, but it is definitely an avenging heritage. And so I think attack the house.
Okay, Alex?
Yeah, I feel like tension's rising. Things are getting tough. I feel like when push comes to shove, I think that Jamie would do everything that he can to get out. So I think that he would attack the house too.
Great. And Adrianna?
Oh, I'm gonna be the one different. Rafa's gonna try to figure out something else. One, because like using an axe sounds like a lot of physical activity, and he's not about that. So yeah, he's gonna do everything he can to try to maybe see if there's another way, like outsmart the house.
Okay. Well, obviously you don't write a book called Hatchet Girls unless your characters use the axe. So we're going to go with you use the axe to attack the house. The cabin screams as the axe comes down.
Ooh.
Somewhere a fire starts. When the door opens, you and your friends run out and watch the house burn to the ground. You're safe. You made it. The end until the sequel.
We survived.
We survived.
We survived.
Yay! Well done, everyone. All right. So let's see. I haven't clicked over to the comments. Do you want to take a look over there and see if we've got any questions? So here's a good one. What are your favorite horror scary story tropes? Okay, Alex, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to pick. I am a huge fan of jump scares. But I will say in movies, not so much, but in books, I love, especially because it's such like a tactile thing when you're holding a book and it makes you jump. That's so fun to me. So I love writing that. I love reading that. I love jump scare moments. Also, like any creature feature, like a spooky animal, something like that, or like a cryptid is my newest book that I'm working on. So those are the ones that come to mind for me.
Okay, Adrianna?
I think zombies are my favorite. That's like my favorite kind of horror movie to watch. Like Train to Busan's my favorite horror movie. And so it's really fun in middle grade to write a zombie horror. That's my next book that'll be coming out next year. Because you get to see how gory you get to possibly be before your publisher's like, nope. And so that was really fun. Because the book is set at the Texas State Forensic Anthropology Facility. It's a body farm. And so it was really fun to do that and just have people rotting away everywhere. I loved it.
Take my money now.
Exactly.
Anne?
I think there are a lot of tropes that are tired, but I have to say I really love the final girl trope. I mean, you think about, I was raised, when I was a teen, I watched Halloween, and Jamie Lee Curtis was such a, a bad, bleak character, and she so tough. And I love the idea that there's this one who just doesn't quite fall for the stuff, and that survives. And so I do think that's one that I enjoy. And by the way, Adrianna, I love zombies. There's this whole thing about them being done, and there's too much. I'm like, oh no, zombies are never done. Never done. It's like, and an analogy for colonization. I mean, so much you can do with zombies, but.
So I love a possession trope. That is like my scariest. I think, when you're Latina and you're raised Catholic, you are raised to believe like there is nothing scarier than being possessed by the devil, which is absolutely possible. Like, that was what my house believed. So like The Exorcist was always my scariest movie. And now the sequel is coming out today on Friday, the 13th of all dates. Yes. And so my first YA horror, Small Town Monsters, that was me trying to work on the possession trope, but instead of it just possessing one person, it spreads through the entire town, and the whole town is somehow possessed by this evil. I do love a good exorcism story. So let's see, do we have any other questions popping up from the chat? What is the one horror movie you would love to make a Kidlit adaptation for? Okay. I will actually say what I was super psyched about was to see some of the Kidlit from my childhood now being adapted. Like the Fear Street movies that came out, which were based on R.L. Stein's Fear Street books from the 90s. Like I was a child of the 90s, so that's what I grew up with. And I thought that those were fantastic. And even the Midnight Club that came out on Netflix was based on Christopher Pike's book, which I was like a diehard Christopher Pike fan in the 90s. So I love that now you're seeing this resurgence of the 90s kidlit horror in today's horror. But what would you guys say? We'll start with Adrianna.
So there's this movie. It's called Juan of the Dead, not Shaun of the Dead. It's a Cuban movie. It's called Juan of the Dead. It is amazing because I think given our political history, the Cuban people, we've got a strong streak of pessimism in us, which actually fits the horror genre really well, because pessimism is always like the worst is going to happen, and horror is like, yep, here you go. And so I would totally love to adapt Juan of the Dead as like a middle grade novel where like these Cuban kids have to band together. Because it's just very funny, because similarly in Shaun of the Dead, Juan, our main character, doesn't realize that zombies have overtaken the island at first, because it just seems like the regular workings of the Cuban government. So it's a very funny political commentary as well. But yeah, no, I highly recommend Juan of the Dead. I would like to write that book.
Okay. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, okay. I feel like I have a more general answer for this, but I would love to write an adaptation that's like the teen kids of somebody who was featured in like the main movie franchise. So I've been watching like the Saw movies recently, and I'm not sure how that would work, but I think it would be really cool to explore like the psychological effect of something like really horrific, and you have this like legacy horror thing that everybody loves from the movies, and then you get to write about like the kids or relatives of the people who were originally involved in the movie. I think that would be so cool.
Mm-hmm. That was actually my inspiration for when I did Small Town Monsters, which was my last horror book that came out. I was watching The Conjuring, which again, I love a possession story. Yeah. And it's based on real life Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were real demonologists that worked for the Catholic Church. And in the first movie, they have a daughter, and the daughter starts experiencing all this paranormal activity while her parents are off on a job. And I paused the movie and I was like, wait, did they really have a daughter? And I Googled it, and they do. She's an adult now, and she does not do any interviews. I couldn't even find a photo of her, but interestingly, her husband is now like taking over the legacy of her parents' work. So he's now the head of the New England Paranormal Society. They actually did have a basement full of demonic artifacts that you could have toured up until Lorraine Warren died like 2 years ago. When I wrote Small Town Monsters, Lorraine Warren was still alive. I could have gone to Connecticut and toured her demonic basement. And that was where I draw my personal line. Like, I will hike the haunted forest. I will sleep in Lizzie Borden's house, but I will not walk through Lorraine Warren's haunted demonic artifacts. And so, yeah, that was the inspiration for the book. I was like, what would it have been like to be the actual daughter of demonologists, and how would a town in Connecticut treat this person?
That's so cool. I would love to go into the demon basement. We can swap places.
Oh, hell no.
You could actually see the real Annabelle doll. Like you could, and the town got so mad because it was a normal street and a normal house that they ended up, when she died, pushing it out. Like they like closed it up and lost their permit to do it anymore.
Yeah, I don't do basements. And Vermont basements are really scary. Alex, I don't know whether you know this, but my basement has dirt walls, and there's a crawl space underneath the extension. And it's Shelobe's cave. And I don't go down there. I just don't. We can forget Christmas. That's where the ornaments are. That's okay. We don't need them. We can have an austere Christmas. For me, I think I'm doing it. My next horror novel for HarperCollins is going to be Cthulhu in the Hamptons. So H.P. Lovecraft is a foundational horror writer, and I want to say right away, very problematic. He was misogynistic and bigoted and just sort of not a nice guy, and it's sort of infused in his work, but he is, a lot of the monsters that we have come from his. And so Cthulhu, you all know him, even if you don't know by the name, you know, it's sort of the tendrilled head and the wings and the strong body. And so I in my next book, I sort of turn that on its head and sort of take, you know, Lovecraft back. So, I mean, that's what Lovecraft Country did as well. So I like the idea of taking traditional ones and turning them on its head. And in like Invasion of the Body Snatchers was one when I was a kid that really, movie-wise, that scared the bejeekers out of me. And so I you know, that would be interesting as well. I mean, I would like to sort of reimagine, and I love novels that reimagine traditional stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Let's see. Do we have a couple more before we wrap up? Are your characters based on real people that you know? And if so, do the real people know this? I'm just going to say a little aside first. I don't base my characters on real people, but I do use real names in my books. I'm on my 8th book, so I started out using my friends' names, and now we've gotten so old that I'm using their kids' names in my books. And so I can always tell if one of my friends or family members have read my book, because if they haven't sent me a picture of their kid's name or their name like on the page, I'm like, you haven't read it. Like, I didn't see that Bridget Lewandowski photo come my way. Like, I also use Eagles players, Philadelphia Eagles players, for the cops in all of my books, going all the way back. It's like Detective Dawkins, Detective McCoy, Detective Ertz, and like, if you know, you know. All right, Adrianna.
So for me, I have a son who is in 10th grade, and he's always a big inspiration for all my characters. But honestly, never more so than with this book, because the whole reason that the very first chapter of the book is Rafa and his friends stealing the slushie machine from the school cafeteria. The whole reason that happens is because I was walking home from school with my son one day, and he just blurted out, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to steal the slushie machine from the school cafeteria." And I was like, no, but I'm totally stealing that and putting it in a book. So he, much like me, has no filter, and we're often like bouncing ideas off of each other. So he's a big inspiration, I think, for a lot of my characters. But I love that you use names of people you know, because here's like a little Easter egg. In every single one of my books, there is a character named Mr. Gerhardt. That is my brother-in-law, and it's become this family joke that I work him into all my books. He's not too happy that he's a cadaver in my next book. He's kind of been down. He was like school principal, and then he was a teacher. He was a cafeteria worker, and now he's a cadaver, and he's a little upset with me. So, yeah. One of these days, I'm going to write a fan fiction that connects all the Mr. Gerhardts in all my books.
Oh, I love that. Alex, how about you?
Yeah. I don't think I ever like steal somebody's whole personality or backstory or anything, but I do think that my characters are kind of like pieced together from people that I know in real life. Like Taylor, for example, she's like very hard-headed and confident and really family oriented. And she's definitely inspired by like 2 different friends that I was really close with at the time that I was reading or writing this book. So she's just kind of like smushed together different parts of people that I care about. But Jamie, my main character, is named after a really good friend of mine, and he does know. I asked him specifically, I was like, can I use your name for this guy? They have 0% overlapping personalities, like total opposite people. But I thought his name was a perfect fit, and he was really happy that he got to be included in the book, which I think is nice.
Great. Anne, how about you?
In Bring Up From Hell, a lot of the townspeople are sort of secondary characters are actual people from Stowe, Vermont. And but the main characters, I mean, I think so many of my main characters, which might be true with you guys as well, have elements of my own personality. But they're sort of like, and I think Alex, you were sort of saying they're amalgam, they're combinations of people and personalities, you know, and like sometimes if you want to give them a quirk, it's more realistic if you take it a real person's quirk. I would never want anybody to think I was making fun of them or I mean, I did make the police captain in 5 Midnights my uncle in Puerto Rico who actually works for the police, and he loved it. I made him 6 foot, he's 5'8", so he was, so, I would never do it in a not flattering way. Like, I'm not going to put old boyfriends in there and things like that. I think that's, I don't want to be mean, but I think that they're all sort of parts of myself or my family.
Yeah, I love when you include those little Easter eggs. In one of my first books, I had a sister who had all these ex-boyfriends. My husband is the youngest of 4 brothers, and he has one first cousin that grew up with a brother. And I put all of their names in the same paragraph as her ex-boyfriends, like Jordan, Matt, Terry, Jerry, and everyone who knows like just busted up laughing when I described them all. So when you've got those Easter eggs in there for your friends and family, it's always fun. Mm-hmm. Do we have time, do you think, for one more question? Let's see what we've got. Yes. Can you recommend a YA or middle grade book for spooky season? I will start because I've been touting this book for a while. Tiffany D. Jackson's Weight of Blood. Mm-hmm. It is a reimagining of Stephen King's Carrie. And it just blew me away because instead of, and if you know the story of Carrie, it opens with her in puberty, and that's sort of what kicks off the bullying towards her and all of her powers. And in Tiffany's book, she is a African-American biracial teen who is passing for white. And it's when her classmates learn that she is half Black that kicks off the bullying incident that causes all of this. And it's in a town that still has 2 different proms for, the African-American students. It's just done so well. It's a multiple points of views. It has a podcast lacing through it. The audiobook has got like a cast of narrators. It's really excellent. So that would be Weight of Blood. Let's go with Alex. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, that sounds really good. First of all, I'm going to buy all of your books and read all of them. That's my first recommendation. But also one on my TBR list is The Forest Demands Its Due by Kosako Jackson. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you like the sound of all of our books on the panel, then you probably like that one too. It's set in like a haunted forest. I think there's a spooky creature involved, but the main character is a queer Black teen. So I think it's super cool to like see diversity in the horror space again. And I definitely want to read that one next.
Mm-hmm. Anne?
I have to recommend Infested by Angel Luis Colon. Mm-hmm. It is, if dolls, basements, and clowns frighten me, cockroaches are another level. So this is like, it takes that anxiety and puts it at 11. And it's set in New York City. It has a Latina main character. It's really, I actually found it scary and I was a little creeped out, but
okay. Adrianna?
I second that one. That one was amazing because I'm from Florida where we have a ton of like cat-sized cockroaches. And so, yeah, it hit really well. What I love to recommend is this book by Wakati Brown. It's The Very Unfortunate Wish of Melanie Yoshimura. If you want to read horror that draws from cultural mythologies, this is based on the Japanese folktale of the Melon Princess. And it's really, really good. I think this book and then this other one, if you think that middle grade is not going to be scary or is not going to be creepy, this book and then this one, Hide and Seeker by Daka Herman, it will prove you wrong. Middle grade actually goes pretty hard when it comes to horror. This book, I was super jealous at how creepy Daka was allowed to be because I'm trying to always be really gory in my books and they're like, nope. And so, yes, I recommend both those strongly because it's also, we have a Japanese writer, a Black writer, and I want to see more POC authors in the horror space, particularly in middle grade.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Great.
Seeing it.
Thank you so much. So I believe we are at the 1 hour mark. So I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today for Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month, spooky season, and Friday the 13th for a YA middle grade horror panel. We couldn't have timed that better. So thank everyone who came out, and I'm sure you can find our social media handles if you want to ask us any follow-up questions or if any of the teachers want to reach out to us, we are available.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, y'all. This was fun.